All right, everyone, welcome to our second study session of the text 14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy and Oriental Occultism by author Yogi Ramacharaka. Today we will be reading chapters 3 and 4. And if you'd like to download a copy of this text, it is available on our website, mysticknowledge.org. Under the ebook library-1 link, you will see a section at the top of the page dedicated to Yogi Ramacharaka / William Walker Atkinson. You'll be able to find a copy of the text there available for download free of charge. As you can see here, right here, the second text, 14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy, on our website. Let me go ahead and queue up today's reading. Then begin. Chapter 3, the third lesson, the spiritual principles. Change the view. In our second lesson, we gave you a brief outline of the fourth and fifth principles of man. 4, instinctive mind, and 5, intellect. Let's do a quick sound check. Okay. As we have told you before, man has passed through the fourth principle stage to its extreme and has now passed on to a consciousness of the fifth principle, intellect. Some of us have developed the intellectual stage to a considerable extent, although we have practically conquered but a few square miles of the new territory of the mind, and there is still a great task before us. While other men seem to have a consciousness almost altogether with the borders of the instinctive mind and have only a glimmering of intellect. Not only is this true of the savage races, but many, very many of so-called civilized people have not learned to do their own thinking and seem willing to allow others to do their thinking for them. They following certain leaders with the stupid habit of the sheep. But still the race is progressing, slowly but surely, and many are thinking now who have never thought before. A greater number are refusing to take their thinking secondhand and are insisting upon knowing for themselves. When we consider that there are many men in whom the fifth principle, the intellect, has scarcely unfolded, and that the race in general has taken but a few steps into the land of the intellect, we will begin to realize how difficult it is for any of us except the man or woman of exceptional spiritual unfoldment to comprehend even faintly the still higher principles. It is something like a man born blind trying to comprehend a light, or one born deaf endeavoring to form a mental concept of sound. One can only form an idea of something akin to his experiences. A man who has never tasted anything sweet cannot form an idea of sugar. Without experience or consciousness of a thing, our minds are unable to form a concept. But nearly all of us who have been attracted to these lessons, or who have attracted these lessons to us, have had experiences which will enable us to comprehend something of the sixth principle, have had glimmerings of consciousness which help us to understand something of the spiritual mind, a tendency toward the occult, the hunger of the soul for more light, are indications that the sixth principle, spiritual mind, is beginning to shade into our consciousness. And although it may be ages before we awaken into full spiritual consciousness, we are still being influenced and helped by it. This spiritual unrest often causes us great discomfort until we find ourselves on the right road to knowledge. And even thereafter, we feel more or less unsatisfied by the few crumbs that drop to us from the table of knowledge. But despair not, seekers after the truth. These pains are but the travail of spiritual birth. Great things are before you. Take courage and fear not. Toward the end of this lesson, we will speak of the process of illumination or spiritual consciousness, which has come or is coming to many of us. And what we have to say may throw light upon many experiences which have come to you, and for which you have heretofore had no explanation. We will now take up the subject of the sixth principle, spiritual mind, which will be more or less plain to those who have had glimmerings of consciousness from this plane of the soul, but which will be full of hard sayings and dark corners to those who have not as yet reached the stage of unfoldment. The seventh principle, the spirit, however, is beyond the comprehension of any except the few enlightened and highly developed souls in and out of the body, who are as far as above the ordinary man as the average enlightened man is above the bushman. We can but pass on to you enough to give you a general intellectual idea of what is meant by spirit. The consciousness of it is still far beyond the race in its present stage. It is well, however, to know of the existence of spirit, as it helps us to understand something of the spiritual mind, which is spirit's means of communication with the intellectual consciousness. The comprehension of spiritual mind, however, opens up such a wonderful world of thought that we are satisfied to leave the understanding of spirit until such time as we will grow into a consciousness of it. Number 6, the spiritual mind. The sixth principle, spiritual mind, has been styled by some writers the superconscious mind, which term is a fairly good one, as it distinguishes between the lower subconscious mind or instinctive mind, the conscious mind or intellect, and itself, which later will, while outside of the realm of ordinary human consciousness, is still a very different thing from the lower or instinctive mind. While the actual existence of the spiritual mind has been made manifest to but a limited number of the human race, there are many who are becoming conscious of the higher something within, which leads them to higher and nobler thoughts, desires, aspirations, and deeds. And there is a still greater number who receive a faint glimmering of the light of the spirit, and though they know it not, are more or less influenced by it. In fact, the entire race receives some of its beneficial rays, although in some cases the light is so bedimmed by the bedimmed by the dense material obstacles surrounding the man that his spiritual twilight is almost akin to the blackness of night. But man is ever unfolding, discarding sheath after sheath, and is slowly coming home. The light will eventually shine full upon all. All that we consider good, noble, and great in the human mind emanates from the spiritual mind and is gradually unfolded into the ordinary consciousness. Some Eastern writers prefer the term projected, as more correctly indicating the process whereby the ray of light is sent into the consciousness of the man who has not yet reached the superhuman stage of full spiritual consciousness. All that has come to man in his evolution, which tends toward nobility, true religious feeling, kindness, humanity, justice, unselfish love, mercy, sympathy, etc., has come to him through his slowly unfolding spiritual mind. His love of God and his love of man has come to him in this way. As the unfoldment goes on, his idea of justice enlarges, he has more compassion, his feeling of human brotherhood increases, his idea of love grows, and he increases in all the qualities which men of all creeds pronounce good, and which may all be summed up as the practical attempt to live out the teachings of that great spiritual master, when he enunciated the great truth, well understood by the occultists of all creeds, but so little understood by many who claim to be followers of him, saying, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." As man's spiritual consciousness begins to unfold, he begins to have an abiding sense of the reality of the existence of the supreme power. And growing along with it, he finds the sense of human brotherhood, of human relationship, gradually coming into consciousness. He does not get these things from his instinctive mind, nor does his intellect make him feel them. Spiritual mind does not run contrary to intellect. It simply goes beyond intellect. It passes down to the intellect certain truths which it finds in its own regions of the mind, and intellect reasons about them, but they do not originate from intellect. Intellect is cold. Spiritual consciousness is warm and alive with high feeling. Man's growth toward a better and fuller idea of the divine power does not come from intellect, although the latter reasons upon the impressions received and tries to form them into systems, creeds, cults, etc. Nor does the intellect give us our growing sense of the relationship between man and man, the brotherhood of man. Let us tell you why man is kinder to his kind and to forms of life below him than ever before. It is not alone because the intellect teaches him the value of kindness and love. For man does not become kind or loving by cold reasoning. On the contrary, he becomes kind and loving because there arise within him certain impulses and desires coming from some unknown place, which render it impossible for him to be otherwise without suffering discomfort and pain. These impulses are as real as other desires and impulses. And as man develops, these impulses become more numerous and much stronger. Look at the world of a few hundred years ago and look at it today and see how much kinder and more loving we are than in those days. But do not boast of it, for we will seem as mere savages to those who follow us and who will wonder at our inhumanity to our brother man from their point of view. As man unfolds spiritually, he feels his relationship to all mankind, and he begins to love his fellow man more and more. It hurts him to see others suffering, and when it hurts him enough, he tries to do something to remedy it. As time goes on and man develops, the terrible suffering which many human beings undergo today will be impossible. For the reason that the unfolding spiritual consciousness of the race will make the pain felt so severely by all that the race will not be able to stand it, and they will insist upon matters being remedied. From the inner recesses of the soul comes a protest against the following of the lower animal nature. And although we may put it aside for a time, it will become more and more persistent until we are forced to heed it. The old story of each person having two advisors, one at each ear, one whispering to him to follow the higher teachings, and the other tempting him to pursue the lower path, is shown to be practically true by the occult teaching regarding the three mental principles. The intellect represents the I consciousness of the average person. This I has on one side the instinctive mind, sending him the old desires of the former self, the impulses of the less developed life, and the animal or lower man, which desires were all very well in lower stages of development, but which are unworthy of the growing man. On the other side is the spiritual mind, sending its unfolding impulses into the intellect and endeavoring to draw the consciousness up to itself, to aid in the man's unfoldment and development, and to cause him to master and control his lower nature. The struggle between the higher and lower natures has been noticed by all careful observers of the human mind and character, and many have been the theories advanced to account for it. In former times, it is taught that man was being tempted by the devil on the one hand and helped by a guardian angel on the other. But the truth is known to all occultists that the struggle is between the two elements of man's nature, not exactly warring, but each following its own line of effort, and the I being torn and bruised in its efforts to adjust itself. The ego is in a transition stage of consciousness, and the struggle is quite painful at times. But the growing man in time rises above the attraction of the lower nature, and dawning spiritual consciousness enables him to understand the true state of affairs and aids him in asserting his mastery over the lower self and in assuming a positive attitude toward it, while at the same time, he opens himself up to the light from the spiritual mind and holds himself in a negative attitude toward it, resisting not its power. The spiritual mind is also the source of the inspiration which certain poets, painters, sculptors, writers, preachers, orators, and others have received in all times and which they receive today. This is the source from which the seer obtains his vision, the prophet his foresight. Many have concentrated themselves upon high ideals in their work and have received rare knowledge from this source and have attributed to beings of other worlds, from angels, spirits, from God himself. But all came from within. It was the voice of their higher self speaking to them. We do not mean to say that no communications come to man from other intelligences. Far from this. We know that higher intelligences do often communicate with man through the channel of his spiritual mind. But much that man has attributed to outside intelligences has really come from himself. And man, by the development of his spiritual consciousness, may bring himself into a relationship and contact with this higher part of his nature, and may thus become possessed of a knowledge in which the intellect has not dared dream. Certain high psychic powers are also open to man in this way, but such powers are rarely obtained by one until he has risen above the attractions of the lower part of his nature. For unless this were so, man might use these high gifts for base purposes. It is only when man ceases to care for power for his personal use that power comes. Such is the law. When man learns of the existence of his spiritual mind and begins to recognize its promptings and leadings, he strengthens his bond of communication with it and consequently receives light of a greater brilliancy. When we learn to trust the Spirit, it responds by sending us more frequent flashes of illumination and enlightenment. As one unfolds in spiritual consciousness, he relies more upon this inner voice and is able more readily to distinguish it from impulses from the lower planes of the mind. He learns to follow Spirit's leadings and to allow it to lend him a guiding hand. Many of us have learned to know the reality of being led by the Spirit. To those who have experienced this leading, we need not say more, for they will recognize just what we mean. Those who have not as yet experienced it must wait until the time comes for them, for we cannot describe it, and there are no words to speak of these things which are beyond words. Toward the close of this lesson, we will give a brief outline of some of the phases of illumination or awakening of spiritual consciousness, which has come to some of us and will come to all in this or future phases of their unfoldment. We must hasten on to a brief consideration of that which can only be faintly understood by any of us, the seventh principle, Spirit. Number 7, Spirit. How shall we approach this subject, which even the most advanced minds in the flesh today can but faintly comprehend? How can the finite express or comprehend the infinite? Spirit, man's seventh principle, is the divine spark, our most precious inheritance from the divine power, a ray from the central sun, the real self. Words cannot express it. Our minds fail to grasp it. It is the soul of the soul. To understand it, we must understand God, for spirit is a drop from the spirit ocean, a grain of sand from the shores of the infinite, a particle of the sacred flame. It is that something within us which is the cause of our evolution through all the weary ages. It was the first to be, and yet it will be the last to appear in full consciousness. When man arrives at a full consciousness of spirit, he will be so much higher than man that such a being is at present inconceivable to the intellect. Confined in many sheets of matter, it has waited through the long and weary ages for even a faint recognition, and is content to wait for ages more until it is fully brought into consciousness. Man will ascend many steps of development, from man to archangel, before spirit will fully claim its own. The spirit is that within man which closest approaches the center, is nearest to God. It is only an occasional precious moment that we are aware of the existence of spirit within us, and in such moments we are conscious of coming into the awful presence of the unknown. These moments may come when one is engaged in deep religious thought, while reading a poem bearing a precious message from soul to soul, in some hour of affliction, when all human aid has failed us, and when human words seem but mockery, in a moment when all seems lost, and we feel the necessity of a direct word from a being higher than ourselves. When these moments come, they leave with us a peace which never afterward entirely escapes us, and we are ever after changed beings. In the moment of illumination, or the dawn of spiritual consciousness, we also feel the real presence of the Spirit. In these moments, we become conscious of our relationship with and connection with the center of life. through the medium of the Spirit, God reveals himself to man. We cannot dwell longer on this subject. It overpowers one, and mere words seem too weak for use in connection with it. Those who have felt the impulses of the spiritual mind have been made faintly conscious of the abiding sense of the Spirit, although they cannot grasp its full significance. And those who have not experienced these things would not understand us if we wrote volumes of our imperfect and undeveloped conceptions of the subject. So we will pass on, trusting that we have awakened in your minds at least a faint desire to be brought into a closer communion and contact with this, the highest part of self, self itself. The peace of the Spirit abide within you. Illumination or spiritual consciousness. With many, spiritual mind unfolds gradually and slowly. And while one may feel a steady increase of spiritual knowledge and consciousness, he may not have experienced any marked or startling change. Others have had moments of what is known as illumination, when they seemed lifted almost out of their normal state and where they seemed to pass into a higher plane of consciousness or being, which left them more advanced than ever before. Although they could not carry back into consciousness a clear recollection of what they had experienced while in the exalted state of mind, these experiences have come to many persons in different forms and degrees of all forms of religious beliefs, and have been generally associated with some feature of that particular religious belief entertained by the person experiencing the illumination. But advanced occultists recognize all of these experiences as differing forms of one and the same thing, the dawning of the spiritual consciousness, the unfoldment of the spiritual mind. Some writers have styled this experience cosmic consciousness, which is a very appropriate name, as the illumination, at least in its higher forms, brings one in touch with the whole of life, making him feel a sense of kinship with all life, higher or lower, great or small, good or bad. These experiences, of course, vary materially according to the degree of unfoldment of the individual, his previous training, his temperament, etc. But certain characteristics are common to all. The most common feeling is that of possessing almost complete knowledge of all things, almost omniscience. This feeling exists only for a moment and leaves one at first in an agony of regret over what he has seen and lost. Another feeling commonly experienced is that of a certainty of immortality, a sense of actual being, and the certainty of having always been and of being destined to always be. Another feeling is a total slipping away of all fear and the acquirement of a feeling of certainty, trust, and confidence, which is beyond the comprehension of those who have never experienced it. Then a feeling of love sweeps over the one, a love which takes in all life, from those near to one in the flesh to those at the farthest parts of the universe, from those whom we hold as pure and holy to those whom the world regards as vile, wicked, and utterly unworthy. All feelings of self-righteousness and condemnation seem to slip away and one's love, like the light of the sun, falls upon all alike, irrespective of their degree of development or goodness. To some, these experiences have come as a deep, reverent mood or feeling, which took complete possession of them for a few moments or longer, while others have seemed in a dream and have become conscious of a spiritual uplifting accompanied by a sensation of being surrounded by a brilliant and all-pervading light or glow. To some, certain truths have become manifest in the shape of symbols, the true meaning of which did not become apparent until perhaps long afterward. These experiences, when they have come to one, have left him in a new state of mind, and he has never been the same man afterward, although the keenness of the recollection has worn off. There remains a certain memory which long afterward proves a source of comfort and strength to him, especially when he feels faint of faith and is shaken like a reed by the winds of conflicting opinions and speculations of the intellect. The memory of such an experience is a source of renewed strength, a haven of refuge to which the weary soul flies for shelter from the outside world, which understands it not. These experiences are usually also accompanied with a sense of intense joy. In fact, the word and thought joy seems to be uppermost in the mind at the time. But it is a joy not of ordinary experience. It is something which cannot be dreamed of until after one has experienced it. It is a joy, the recollection of which will cause the blood to tingle and the heart to throb whenever the mind reverts to the experience. As we have already said, there also comes a sense of a knowing of all things, an intellectual illumination impossible to describe. From the writings of the ancient philosophers of all races, from the songs of the great poets of all peoples, from the preachings of the prophets of all religions and times, we can gather traces of this illumination, which has come to them, this unfoldment of the spiritual consciousness. We have not the space to enumerate these numerous instances. One has told of it in one way, the other in another, but all tell practically the same story. All who have experienced this illumination, even in a faint degree, recognize the like experience in the tale, song, or preaching of another. Though centuries may roll between them. It is the song of the soul, which when once heard is never forgotten. Though it be sounded by the crude instrument of the semi-barbarous races, or the finished instrument of the talented musician of today, its strains are plainly recognized. From old Egypt comes the song. From India in all ages. From ancient Greece and Rome, from the early Christian saint. From the Quaker friend. From the Catholic monasteries. From the Mohammedan mosque. From the Chinese philosopher. From the legends of the American Indian hero prophet. It is always the same strain. And it is swelling louder and louder, as many more are taking it up and adding their voices or the sounds of their instruments to the grand chorus. That much misunderstood Western poet, Walt Whitman, knew what he meant, and so do we, when he blurted out in uncouth verse his strange experiences. Read what he says. Has it ever been better expressed? As in a swoon, one instant, another sun, ineffable, full dazzles me. And all the orbs I knew, and brighter, unknown orbs. One instant of the future land, heaven's land. And when he rouses himself from his ecstasy, he cries, I cannot be awake, for nothing looks to me as it did before, or else I am awake for the first time, and all before has been a mean sleep. And we must join with him when he expresses man's inability to describe intelligently this thing in these words. When I try to tell the best I find, I cannot. My tongue is ineffectual on its pivots. My breath will not be obedient to its organs. I become a dumb man. May this great joy of illumination be yours, dear students, and it will be yours when the proper time comes. When it comes, do not be dismayed, and when it leaves you, do not mourn its loss. It will come again. Live on, reaching ever upward your real self, and opening up yourself to its influence. Be always willing to listen to the voice of the silence, willing always to respond to the touch of the unseen hand. In the little manual, Light on the Path, you will find many things which will now perhaps seem plainer to you. Do not fear again, for you have with you always the real self, which is a spark from the divine flame, and which will be as a lamp to your feet to show you the way. Peace be unto you. This concludes chapter 3. We'll next move into chapter 4, the fourth lesson. Okay. The fourth lesson, the human aura. In our previous 3 lessons, we called your attention briefly, in turn, to the 7 principles of man. The subject of the constitution of man, however, is incomplete without a reference to what occultists know as the human aura. This forms a most interesting part of the occult teachings, and reference to it is to be found in the occult writings and traditions of all races. Considerable misapprehension and confusion regarding the human aura have arisen, and the truth has been obscured by the various speculations and theories of some of the writers on the subject. This is not to be wondered at when we remember that the aura is visible only to those of highly developed psychic power. Some possessing inferior sight, which has enabled them to see only certain and of the grosser manifestations of the emanation constituting the aura, have thought and taught that what they saw was all that could be seen, while the real truth is that such people have seen but a part of the whole thing, the remainder being reserved for those of higher development. Some teachers of late years have taught that the aura was really the several principles of man, projecting beyond the space occupied by his physical body. But this is only true in the same sense that the light of the sun is a part of the sun, and the rays of the electric light are part of the light. The heat radiating from the stove, the heat contained within the stove, the odor of a flower, the flower itself. The aura is really an emanation of one or more of the 7 principles of man, radiations sent forth from the principle itself, and not, strictly speaking, a part of the principle, except in the sense above referred to. Each of the 7 principles of which man is composed radiates energy which is visible to the developed psychic senses of certain of our race. This radiated energy is akin to the radiations known as the X-ray, and like them is invisible to the human eye unless aided by something which the human eye does not ordinarily possess. Some of the grosser forms of the aura are visible to those possessing a comparatively undeveloped grade of psychic power, while the higher forms become visible only as the psychic faculties develop in power. There are but comparatively few in the flesh today who have ever seen the aura emanating from the 6th principle, the spiritual mind, and the aura of the 7th principle, the spirit, is visible only to those beings far higher in the scale than the human race as we know it. The aura emanating from the lower 5 principles is seen by many of us who have developed psychic power. Our clearness of vision and range of sight being determined by the particular state of development we have reached. We will try to give our students a general idea of the human aura and a hasty outline of that which pertains to it in this lesson. But it will readily be seen that the subject is one that could not be exhausted in a volume of considerable size. It is a difficult matter to condense information of this nature, but we trust to be able to convey a fairly clear impression of the subject to those of our students who will follow us closely. As we have already stated, each principle radiates energy which, combining, constitutes what is known as the human aura. The aura of each principle, if the other principles be removed, would occupy the same space as that filled by the aura of all or any of the other principles. In other words, the several auras of the different principles interpenetrate each other, and being of different rates of vibration, do not interfere one with the other. When we speak of the aura, we mean the entire aura of the man, visible to one of psychic sight. When we speak of the aura emanating from any particular principle, we distinctly refer to the principle. The grossest form of the human aura is, of course, that emanating from the physical body. This is sometimes spoken of as the health aura, as it is a sure indication of the state of the physical health of the person from whose body it radiates. Like all other forms of the aura, it extends from the body to a distance of 2 to 3 feet, depending upon certain circumstances which need not be mentioned at this place. Like all other forms of the aura, it is oval or egg-shaped. This shape, common to the several manifestations of the aura, has caused some writers to refer to it as the auric egg. The physical aura is practically colorless, or possibly almost a bluish white, resembling the color of clear water, but possessing a peculiar feature not possessed by the other manifestations of aura, inasmuch as to the psychic vision it appears to be streaked by numerous fine lines extending like stiff bristles from the body outward. In normal health and vitality, these bristles stand out stiffly, while in cases of impaired vitality or poor health, they drop like the soft hair on an animal, and in some cases present the appearance of a ruffled coat of hair. the several hairs standing out in all directions, tangled, twisted, and curled. This phenomenon is occasioned by the current of prana energizing the body to a greater or lesser extent, the healthy body having the normal supply of prana, while the diseased or weak body suffers from an insufficient supply. This physical aura is seen by many having a very limited degree of psychic sight and to whom the higher forms of aura are invisible. To the developed psychic, it is sometimes difficult to distinguish, owing to its being obscured by the colors of the higher forms of aura. The psychic, in order to observe it, being compelled to inhibit the impressions of the higher forms of aura and to admit only the vibration of a particular form of aura which he wishes to observe. Particles detached from the physical aura remain around the spot or place where the person has been, and a strongly developed sense found in dogs and other animals enables them to follow up the scent of the person or animal they are tracking. Excuse me. The aura emanating from the second principle, or astral body, is like the principle itself, of a vapor-like appearance and color, having a resemblance to steam just before it dissolves and disappears from sight. It is difficult to distinguish when it is intermingled with the other forms of aura. But when the astral body is seen apart from the physical body, its aura may be perceived, particularly if the observer is not open to the vibrations from the principles sending forth auras of various colors. Those of our readers who have ever seen an astral form, or what is commonly called a ghost, of high or low degree, will probably remember having seen a cloudy, egg-shaped vapor surrounding the more distinct figure of the astral form. This faint, vapor-like oval cloud was the astral aura. It, of course, becomes visible to one to whom an astral form materializes. The aura of the third principle, or prana, is difficult to describe except to those who have seen the X-ray. It looks something like a vapory cloud of the color and appearance of an electric spark. In fact, all manifestations of prana resemble electric light or sparks. Prana has a faint rosy tint when it is in or near the body, but loses this hue as it gets a few inches away. Persons of psychic sight see plainly the spark-like particles of prana being shaken from the fingertips of persons giving so-called magnetic treatments or making mesmeric passes. It may also be seen by many persons who make no claims of psychic sight, to whom it appears like heated air arising from a stove or from the heated ground. That is to say, as a colorless something pulsating and vibrating. This pranic aura is sometimes drawn away from a healthy, strong person by a weak person who is lacking in vitality and who draws away from the strong one that which is needed by the weak one. In cases of this kind, the person drawn upon without his consent will experience a feeling of languor and lassitude after being in the company of a person who has absorbed a share of his vitality. In Science of Breath on page 61, under the head 2, Forming an Aura, we have given a method whereby one may render himself immune to this form of vampirism, conscious or unconscious. This method, while given in the book for another purpose, is equally efficacious in this instance. A stronger effect may be produced by forming a mental image of an auric shell through which no force can escape or no outside influence enter without one's own consent. One may in this way also guard himself against infection from sources which might seriously affect him unless so protected. The pranic aura is also poured out in mesmeric phases or psychic treatments of the sick. But in such cases, the trained operator regulates the flow and takes the trouble to replenish the supply of prana within his system, which will generate and emanate a constant flow of pranic aura. We need not dwell upon these points as they are fully described in Science of Breath, which book will be read with a new light by the student who reads and thinks over what we have said about this feature of the human aura. The little book in question was written for the general public who, while they receive much benefit from it, cannot read from it the meaning which becomes perfectly clear to the student as he passes from stage to stage of these lessons. The little book, simple and unpretentious as it is, has many things hidden away in it which may only be read by the one who is able to understand. The student is advised to reread the little book from time to time and notice how many things he finds in it which he never before discovered. We now approach the most interesting feature concerning the human aura, and we think that some of the facets to be stated in this lesson will be a revelation even to many who are perfectly familiar with the three manifestations of the aura which we have just mentioned. Some may doubt many of the statements which will be made, but we beg to say to such people that they have the means at their disposal to develop and unfold psychic powers of a sufficient degree to see these things for themselves, as thousands of others before them have done. Nothing of the occult teachings need remain hidden to anyone who doubts. Everyone may enter the occult world for himself, providing he pays the price of attainment, which price is not of gold or silver, but of the renunciation of the lower self and the devotion to that which is highest in man. Some, it is true, break into the psychic world without having fitted and purified themselves by the proper methods. But to such, the acquired faculties are a curse rather than a blessing, and such are compelled to retrace their steps with much suffering until they enter in by the right door, the key of which is readily found by all who seek for it in the proper spirit. To return to the higher manifestations of the human aura, we again call your attention to the fact that the aura is seen by the psychic observer as a luminous cloud, nearly oval in shape, extending from 2 feet to 3 feet in all directions from the body. It does not terminate abruptly, but gradually fades into faintness until it disappears entirely. It really extends quite a distance beyond its visible point. It presents the appearance of a luminous cloud of constantly shifting colors, certain colors, however, being predominant in each person, from reasons which we will consider in a few moments. These colors originate from certain mental states of the person whom the aura surrounds. Each thought, emotion, or feeling is manifested by a certain shade or combination of colors belonging to that particular thought, emotion, or feeling, which color or colors manifest themselves in the aura of that particular mental principle in which the thought, emotion, or feeling naturally originates, and are, of course, visible to the observer studying the composite aura of the thinker. The developed psychic may read the thoughts of a person as he can the pages of an open book, providing he understands the language of the auric colors, which, of course, all developed occultists do, although the person who stumbles accidentally into the psychic world on rare occasions will see nothing but the reflection of wonderful colors appearing in a luminous cloud, the meaning of which is not known to him. We think it better, before proceeding further, to give you a general idea of these auric colors and the thought, feeling, or emotion to which each belongs. These colors shade and blend into thousands of combinations, but the following table will perhaps give you a fair idea of the subject and will enable you more readily to understand what we will say a little later on in this lesson. Auric colors and their meanings. Excuse me. Black represents hatred, malice, revenge, and similar feelings. Gray, of a bright shade, represents selfishness. Gray, of a peculiar shade, almost that of a corpse, represents fear and terror. Gray, of a dark shade, represents depression and melancholy. Green, of a dirty shade, represents jealousy. If much anger is mingled with jealousy, it will appear as red flashes on the green background. Green, of almost a slate color shade, represents low deceit. Green, of a peculiar bright shade, represents tolerance to the opinions and beliefs of others. Easy adjustment to changing conditions, adaptability, tact, politeness, worldly wisdom, etc., and qualities which some might possibly consider refined deceit. Red, of a shade resembling the dull flame when it bursts out of a burning building, mingled with the smoke, represents sensuality and the animal passions. Red, seen in the shape of bright red flashes resembling the lightning flash in shape, indicates anger. These are usually shown on a black background. In the case of anger arising from hatred or malice, but in cases of anger arising from jealousy, they appear on a greenish background. Anger arising from indignation or defense of a supposed right lacks these backgrounds and usually shows as red flashes independent of a background. Blue, of a dark shade, represents religious thought, emotion, and feelings. This color, however, varies in clearness according to the degree of unselfishness manifest in the religious conception. The shades and degrees of clearness vary from a dull indigo to crimson, represents love, varying in shade according to the character of the passion. A gross sensual love will be a dull and heavy crimson, while one mixed with higher feelings will appear in lighter and more pleasing shades. A very high form of love shows the color almost approaching a beautiful rose color. Brown, of a reddish tinge, represents avarice and greed. Orange, of a bright shade, represents pride and ambition. Yellow, in its various shades, represents intellectual power. If the intellect contents itself with things of a low order, the shade is a dark, dull yellow. And as the field of the intellect rises to higher levels, the color grows brighter and clearer, a beautiful golden yellow betokening great intellectual attainment, broad and brilliant reasoning, etc. A beautiful, rich violet, the latter representing the highest religious feeling. Light blue, of a peculiarly clear and luminous shade, represents spirituality. Some of the higher degrees of spirituality observed in ordinary mankind show themselves in this shade of blue, filled with luminous bright points, sparkling and twinkling like stars on a clear winter night. The students will remember that these colors form endless combinations and blendings and show themselves in greatly varying degrees of brightness and size, all of which have meanings to the developed occultist. In addition to the colors mentioned above, there are several others for which we have no names, as they are outside of the colors visible in the spectrum, and consequently science not being able to perceive them, has not thought it necessary to bestow definite names upon them, although theoretically they are known to exist. Science tells us that there exists what are known as ultraviolet rays and ultra-red rays, neither of which can be followed by the human eyes, even with the aid of mechanical appliances, these vibrations being beyond our senses. These two ultra colors and several others unknown to science are known to occultists and may be seen by a person of a certain degree of psychic power. The significance of this statement may be more fully grasped when we state that when seen in the human aura, either of these ultra colors indicates psychic development, the degree of intensity depending upon the degree of development. Another remarkable fact to those who have not thought of the matter is that the ultraviolet color in the aura indicates psychic development when used on a high and unselfish plane, while the ultra-red color, when seen in the human aura, indicates that the person has psychic development, but is using the same for selfish and unworthy purposes. Black magic, in fact. The ultraviolet rays lie just outside of an extreme of the visible spectrum known to science, while the ultra-red rays lie just beyond the other extreme. The vibrations of the first are too high for the ordinary human eye to sense, while the second consists of vibrations as much too low as the first is too high. And the real difference between the two forms of psychic power is as great as is indicated by the respective positions of these two ultra colors. In addition to the two ultra colors just alluded to, there's another which is invisible to the ordinary sight, the true primary yellow, which is indicative of spiritual illumination, and which is faintly seen around the heads of the spiritually great. The color which we are taught is characteristic of the seventh principle, spirit, is said to be of pure white light, of a peculiar brilliancy, the like of which has never been seen by human eyes. In fact, the very existence of absolute white light is denied by Western science. The aura emanating from the instinctive mind consists principally of the heavier and duller shades. In sleep, when the mind is quiet, there appears chiefly a certain dull red, which indicates that the instinctive mind is merely performing the animal functions of the body. This shade, of course, is always apparent, but during the waking hours is often obscured by the brighter shades of the passing thoughts, emotions, or feelings. Right here, it would be well to state that even when the mind is calm, there hover in the aura the shades indicative of the predominant tendencies of the man, so that his stage of advancement and development, as well as his tastes and other features of his personality, may be easily distinguished. When the mind is swept by a strong passion, feeling, or emotion, the entire aura seems to be colored by the peculiar shade or shades representing it. For instance, a violent fit of anger causes the whole aura to show bright red flashes upon a black background, almost eclipsing the other colors. This state lasts for a longer or shorter time according to the strength of the passion. Excuse me. If people could but have a glimpse of the human aura when so colored, they would become so horrified at the dreadful sight that they would never again permit themselves to fly into a rage. It resembles the flames and smoke of the pit, which is referred to in certain Orthodox churches. And in fact, the human mind in such a condition becomes a veritable hell temporarily. A strong wave of love sweeping over the mind will cause the entire aura to show crimson, the shade depending upon the character of the passion. Likewise, a burst of religious feeling will bestow upon the entire aura a blue tinge, as explained in the table of colors. In short, A strong emotion, feeling, or passion causes the entire aura to take on its color while the feeling lasts. You will see from what we have said that there are two aspects to the color feature of the aura. The first, depending upon the predominant thoughts habitually manifesting in the mind of the person. The second, depending upon the particular feeling, emotion, or passion, if any, being manifested at the particular time. The passing color disappears when the feeling dies away. Although a feeling, passion, or emotion repeatedly manifested shows itself in time upon the habitual auric color. The habitual color shown in the aura, of course, changes gradually from time to time as the character of the person improves or changes. The habitual colors shown indicate the general character of the person. The passing colors show what feeling, emotion, or passion, if any, is dominating him at that particular time. The student who has read the preceding lessons will realize readily that as a man develops and unfolds, he becomes less and less the prey of passing passions, emotions, or feelings emanating from the instinctive mind, and that intellect and then spiritual mind manifest themselves instead of lying dormant in a latent condition. Remembering this, you'll readily see how great a difference there must be between the aura of an undeveloped man and that of a developed man. The one is a mass of dull, heavy, gross colors, the entire mass being frequently flooded by the color of some passing emotion, feeling, or passion. The other shows the higher colors, as is very much clear, being but a little disturbed by feelings, emotion, and passions, all of which have been brought largely under the control of the will. The man who has intellect well developed shows an aura flooded with the beautiful golden yellow betokening intellectuality. This color, in such cases, is particularly apparent in the upper part of the aura, surrounding the head and shoulders of the man. The more animal colors sinking to the lower part of the aura. Read the remarks under the head of yellow in the color table in this lesson. When the man's intellect has absorbed the idea of spirituality and devotes itself to the acquirement of spiritual power, development, and unfoldment, this yellow will show around its edges. This yellow will show around its edges a light blue of a particularly clear and luminous shade. This peculiarly clear and luminous shade. This peculiar light blue is indicative of what is generally called spirituality, but which is simply intellectual spirituality. If you will pardon the use of somewhat paradoxical term, it is not the same thing as spiritual mind, but is more intellect impregnated by spiritual mind, to use another poor term. In some cases of a high development of this intellectual state, the luminous light blue shows as a broad fringe or border, often being larger than the center itself. And in addition, in special cases, the light blue is filled with brilliant luminous points sparkling and twinkling like stars on a clear winter night. These bright points indicate that the color of the aura of the spiritual mind is asserting itself and shows that spiritual consciousness has either been made momentarily evident to the man or is about to be made so in the near future. This is a point upon which much confusion has arisen in the minds of students and even teachers of occultism. The next paragraph will also have some bearing upon the matter. The aura emanating from the spiritual mind, or sixth principle, bears the color of the true primary yellow, which is invisible to ordinary sight and which cannot be reproduced artificially by man. It centers around the head of the spiritually illumined, and at times produces a peculiar glow which can even be seen by undeveloped people. This is particularly true when the spiritually developed person is engaged in earnest discourse or teaching, at which times his countenance seems fairly to glow and to possess a luminosity of a peculiar kind. The nimbus shown in pictures of the great spiritual leaders of the race is the result of a tradition arising from a fact of a tradition arising from a fact actually experienced by the early followers of such leaders. The halo or glory shown in pictures arises from the same fact. When we again look upon Hoffman's wonderful picture, Gethsemane, we will experience a new understanding of the mystic glow around the head of the great spiritual teacher, whose deep and spiritual teachings have been obscured from the minds of many of those who claim his name, by reason of the ignorance of the generations of teachers who have lived since his death, but whose teachings are living truth to occultists of all races, lands, and outward apparent differences in belief. Excuse me one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Of the aura of the seventh principle, spirit, we can say but little, and that little has been handed down to us by tradition. We are told that it consists of a pure white light, something unknown to science. No man among us has ever seen this light, and none of us ever will in this stage of development. The sight of this wonderful effulgence is reserved for beings far higher in the scale than we are, but who were once mortals like unto us, and like whom we shall in due time be. We are sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we are on the path, and those who have gone before send back cheering messages to us. After long ages, we are going home. And thus concludes chapter 4, or the fourth lesson, the human aura. Next time we will pick up with chapter 5, fifth lesson, thought dynamics. And chapter 6, or lesson 6, telepathy, clairvoyance, or we'll go into more detail of the manifestations of psychic development. And once again, you can pick up a copy of this text on our website, mysticknowledge.org. Under the link ebook library-1, you'll see a section at the top dedicated to Yogi Ramatraka, William Walker Atkinson, and the text we're reading is number 2 here, 14 Lessons in Yogi Philosophy. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. And we'll see you Sunday during our open discussion, as we will continue with chapter 8 in our analysis of the text, The Ancient Language of the Soul, The Mystic Knowledge of Mantra, is written by Mr. Nehemiah Davis. All right, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Have a great night and weekend.